So maybe if positive pitch suppresses it. Now maybe this works once, maybe it never works, but this is the kind of thought process you want to have. If it works once, it was worth it. Maybe when she stands up, you tell them to tuck their head in positive pitch to see if that's enough to kind of help suppress that mechanism. Or if they have the opposite, maybe tell them to exaggerate negative pitch when they stand up. So those are the kind of, when you read a research paper, you're sitting in the back of class bored instead of Facebooking it, start looking at research papers, and if you can't concentrate at that moment, just look them up and save them and read them later. But when you read them, think about how can I utilize this to either localize something or fix it.
So did you say standing up is negative pitch and sitting down is positive pitch?
So when you stand up, if you're climbing a ladder, are you probably going to be looking down or looking up?
Up.
So when you're moving up, correlates with negative pitch. So moving up excites it, and negative pitch excites it. Positive pitch compresses it, and sitting down compresses it. Okay. Now, keep that thought process in mind, and I'm going to keep coming back to it as we talk about this. So there's three types of eye movements. Gaze, which is looking at something and fixating on it. Smooth pursuit, which is basically a moving gaze. You're tracking something with your gaze, and then a saccade, fast eye movement. The level of complexity is also in that order. We're going to start with the most complex, right, saccade. So to move your eyes fast, you have to have three things happen. You have the pulse phase, which is burst activity, so it's fast eye movements. Then you have to stop the eyes once they get on target. So if I want to look here, I have to have a burst or pulse activity to get them there. Once they get to where they're supposed to be, you got to stop them. That's part two. And part three is you got to hold them there. All right? Now, keep in mind that you have elastic forces that always want to keep your eyes in a neutral position. Just think of it as your extraocular muscles. Your superior rectus and inferior rectus are pulling on each other. If everything is cool and neutral, that keeps the eye neutral. Medial rectus and the obliques. All right, so let's say I want to make a right saccade. What side frontal lobes do we have? Left, right? All right, so say right, left. All right, so I'm going to make a rightward saccade. Our left frontal lobe is going to come down and fire to the ipsilateral superior colliculus. All right. Now, superior colliculus, keep in mind that's, besides having burst activity, that's kind of where your maps are, your collicular maps. So keep that in mind. Superior colliculus is going to fire down to one, the omnipause neurons. Omnipause, they're going to fire down to inhibit them. The omnipause neuron's job is to tonically inhibit all burst activity. Okay, we're going to get to in just a second where that burst activity comes from. But their job is to keep fast eye movements from happening. So in order to make a fast eye movement, you have to inhibit them so that they stop inhibiting the burst activity. So it also fires to the contralateral PPRF, paramedian pontine reticular formation. Remember that the reticular formation runs up and down the entire brainstem, the medulla to the mesencephalon. Basically, the reticular formation is always named by its location. Here, paramedian pontine reticular formation. You have excitatory burst neurons and inhibitory burst neurons. All right? The excitatory burst neurons are first going to fire to their ipsilateral abducens nucleus. All right? From there, what is the abducens nucleus? What extraocular muscle is it? control?
Lateral rectus.
So it's going to hit up the lateral rectus, and then to get to 3, it goes through the medial longitudinal fasciculus, the MLF, right? To 3, which then moves the medial rectus. Now you got the pulse, right? Now, we're talking about all these individual nuclei, but keep in mind, the more details you know, the more you're going to be able to know as far as treatments and localization. But try to keep it simple in your head that what we just said is to make a right saccade, it's the right PPRF, left brain, right PPRF that excites it. So that's saying that for a right saccade, it's the right pons, right? So stimulating the right pons is going to coincide with a right saccade. So think about it that way. Does anybody have any questions with that part right there?
Could you repeat what the PRX is?
Paramedian, around paramedian, paramedian pontine reticular formation. All right. Now, while that's going on, the inhibitory burst neurons are firing over and inhibiting the contralateral PPRF to make sure that there's no burst activity moving the eyes the opposite direction. Okay? And this is kind of a review, and I want to add some more things to it, so if anybody has any questions, stop me, slow me down. All right, so we're inhibiting the opposite side. Now, so that's the pulse. Now you have to stop the eyes, all right? That is done by, let me write this over here. The cerebellum, just like everything else, what does it do? It basically monitors, make sure everything's working correctly. Same with the eye movements. For pulse activity, it's the dorsal vermis, and the fastigial nucleus. I can't spell, so I hope that's right. That does the pulse. The step is controlled by the flocculus. I guess that's right. Flocculus and paraflocculus. All right. So the flocculus and paraflocculus monitors step activity. Dorsal vermis and fastigial nucleus monitors the pulse. So just did the pulse to the target. Now I need to stop them. That is done by the fastigial nucleus. All right. It's ipsilateral to the side that you're looking, but right now we're just going to say, and I'll tell you why later, it doesn't matter what side fastigial nucleus, you're just saying that the fastigial nucleus is lesion. Okay? So, if the fastigial nucleus is lesioned and it's its job to stop the eyes, what do you think that's going to mean? The eyes miss the target, hypermetria, they have to come back. Right? So fastigial nucleus, the eyes are going to go too far, then they're going to have to come back. You get hypermetria. The dorsal vermis' job is to kind of help the eyes get there. So with a dorsal vermis lesion, without that help signal, it's not going to quite get there. So now you have the dorsal vermis lesion, you're going to have hypometria. Fastigial lesion, the eyes don't stop in time, you get hypermetria. With a dorsal vermis lesion, it didn't have enough signal, so you get hypometria. Okay? Any questions with that? All right. Now we have the pulse, the eyes stopped, now we're going to hold them there. That's called the step. All right? This excitatory burst neuron sends that pulse signal to the nucleus prepositus hypoglossi, aka the neural integrator. The neural integrator, its job is to transpose one type of signal into a different type of signal. Here it's getting a pulse signal, so it's going to transpose it into this proper step signal. Once it does that, it's going to send that signal to 6, so it says, hey, give this much stimulus to hold the eyes where they're at. Does anybody have a question for that?
So the inhibitory signal from the right excitatory burst neuron and the pulse signal that goes to the MPH, is that the same? Does that happen at the same time as the excitatory up to 6 on that side?
It does, but it sends this signal at the same time, but think that it's going to take a couple of milliseconds for this to get transposed.
I'm just writing down the steps, that's what I'm trying to figure out.
All right, now, so what I just told you is that it's the NPH's job to hold the eyes on target. So if it's lesion, if I look here, now I've got a lesion and I can't hold it. Remember, those elastic forces are trying to slowly bring my eyes back neutral. All right, and then as soon as my brain realizes, hey, I'm not looking at where I'm supposed to be, you have a fast movement back on target. So you get this right here, which is what? The stagnus.
Is this the in-gaze local status? Or is that something different?
In gaze, so this is because it's brought out by gazing, it's gaze evoked nystagmus, right? In gaze nystagmus is the same thing except that it's when you look all the way at your end range for your eyes, which is very fatiguing. So anybody, if you have them look at their end range, eventually they're going to start getting nystagmus because they can't hold it.
Is that the same mechanism as this, or is that a little bit different?
That's different because that is that you're fatiguing. It's too hard to hold your eyes there. This is because you have a leaky integrator.
Okay.
Let me back up real quick and say, for the people that haven't been here very long and haven't heard me lecture too many times, the way I like to do things is, with neurology, there is always a ton of different things that can cause something. What I like to do is give you the one or two most probable things, all right? And just know that it could be some other things besides what I'm giving you. What you have to do is take that, knowing, let's say that I said hypometria is caused by what? Dorsal-vermis lesion, right? So you need to think, all right, what other tests do I know that can further substantiate that? What's something that you know from basic club?
Lesion.
The shin, right? Because dorsal vermis, that's more lower limbs. Midline is a dorsal vermis. So if it is dorsal vermis, you would expect maybe a little dysmetria with that, right? So you need to use what you know to further substantiate it. If it doesn't look like it's working out, then that's when you need to stop and ask somebody, or down the road you'll figure out more things that it could be. Anyway, all right. So that is gaze evoked nystagmus. Now, the NPH and the medial vestibular nucleus are right next to each other, and that's because they're both heavily involved with step. With saccades, the kind of the boss, the number one in charge is the NPH, followed by the medial vestibular nucleus. With slow eye movements, whether it's VOR or pursuits, the NVN is more in control, backed up by the NPH. All right. Now, the flocculus is what regulates the step. So, what do you think that means? A flocculus lesion could also bring about gaze evoke nystagmus, right? Okay. So are we good with that right there? So that's not too in depth, but that's as far as we're able.
And it's not in more depth, but I've heard and read, especially when, at the CDC, seeing Dr. Garrick and all them, with the saccades talking about the interstitial nucleus of the jaw. What is that exactly?
That's the next. So these are all horizontal movements. For vertical,
Okay.
the NPH of the vertical is the interstitial nucleus of Gall. The burst neurons are in the rostral interstitial nucleus of the medial longitudinal fasciculus. But that just, everybody knows what the MLF is, the medial longitudinal fasciculus. There's a nuclei in the MLF that has the burst activity. So, that's why with horizontal movements, you're testing the pons. With vertical movements, you're testing everything to the midbrain fluid, right? With what we know right now, let's give you a couple of case scenarios and see if you can come up with the answer. What would, if I had a right slow velocity saccade? So a saccade is supposed to be extremely fast. You're not supposed to see the eyes move. You do your little test. If you have, it should just look like they're on your nose and now they're on your thumb. If it looks like a really fast pursuit, that means the velocity is too slow. What do you think would cause, not you, a slow velocity right saccade? Nobody?
The decrease in pulse mechanism from the Chapuis's nucleus?
Close. Very, very close.
Like the excitatory
Excitatory, because this is where the burst activity is coming from. For this, it's almost like he's like a relay. So, but that's still the pons. So you're thinking in your head, slow activity to the right, a slow saccade to the right could be a lesion to right pons. Right? Just trying to make all this in a clinical context. All right. Now, what could okay. Square wave jerks. What could be, what's a main probable cause of square wave jerk? Do you think? Remember, square wave jerk is when nystagmus, you have, looking at a target, you have a slow move off the target, quick phase back. Square wave is when you have fast moving off and 200 milliseconds or longer pause and then a fast movement back. So it's like bam, bam. What do you think would cause that? So it's a saccade, so it's burst activity, right? It's got to cause it. If it's improper, it's not supposed to be happening, whose job is it to make sure that these guys don't fire? The omnipods, right? So maybe if you have an omnipods failure, an escape, this guy is allowed to fire real quick. Yeah, you have a saccade off, and then a saccade back on. So you're thinking with square wave jerk, possibly omnipods failure. Now, okay, the reason that I said that the vestigial nucleus, you don't have to worry about what side, is because they're so close to the midline, the axons from one vestibular nucleus actually goes through the other. So clinically, if you have a lesion in one, you're going to have a lesion in both. So if you have a lesion in the right vestigial nucleus, you're going to get 99% of the time bilateral hypermetropia. So vestigial nucleus, you're going to get bilateral hypermetropia. Now, there's two types.
Does the dorsal vermis has nothing to do with the velocity of it, just stopping the eyes?
It does have something to do with it, but way more of a chance that it's going to be the pons. Is that possible? Yes.
Thank you.
But it's most likely going to be here. Now, and again, slow me down or ask any questions if you need to. If there's two different types of oscillations, okay? When you're doing checking saccades on somebody, you might see one of two things. If you have them look out here and then look back midline, especially after they fatigue a little bit, doing it a couple times, you may see something like this. An oscillation where you have like this and almost like a pause, kind of like this. What that is, you're thinking extremely lesion vestigial nucleus. Because what it's doing is they're trying to come back midline and they're hypermetric, and even their corrective saccade is hypermetric. The corrective saccade is hypermetric. So they're so lesioned that they're just getting hypermetria back and forth. That's one type. The second type, flutter, is when you might see something that looks like this. What that usually is now, and also keep in mind that that's omnipause. If that's what the problem is, that's still pons. The flutter could be that if you have weak action potentials between these two guys in PPRF, remember when this guy fires, he fires over here to the opposite side to inhibit it. All right? Well, if they have weak action potentials, what does that mean? It means it's easy to fire. If you have an escape, these guys can tend to just have a quick moment of firing back and forth, which causes your eyes to go. So 9 out of 10 times you want to be thinking weak action potentials between the PPRFs if you see that kind of ocular flutter. But now, so that's still going to be pons.